I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing. Antifa!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. Sorry, StreamYard, the application we use to stream, is now in cahoots, I guess, with the censorship apparatus because it mutes you at the beginning of the stream. That's fascinating to know, I'm sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show, where the fourth wall is constantly being struck down / did it ever exist? I'm your host, Katie Halper, and we are so excited to be here with you, and thank you for your patience. We have an amazing show. We are so excited. We will be talking later on in the show with the inimitable Vijay Prashad, who everyone watching knows and loves. But that's not all. Those are not the only guests we'll be having on the show. We will be talking to repeat offender Etan Mabourakh from NIAC, as well as Chris Gilbert, who's also graced the show with his presence. And people love hearing from both of these people because they provide such interesting perspectives. And Chris will join us from Caracas, and Etan will join us from the States, but with a really important perspective as an Iranian-American who gets targeted. He and his organization get targeted by the likes of the Wall Street Journal. So you know you're doing something right when you're smeared by the Wall Street Journal. Before we get started, please do like the stream. Just give it a thumbs up. That's a great way to fight back against the algorithmic suppression that we face. Also, please subscribe. And to subscribe, you press subscribe and then the bell. You also definitely want to do that because we've been doing these extra streams. So last Friday, we did a stream with Medea Benjamin about Code Pink, about their trips to Cuba, about various projects that they're working on. We also spoke about Imran Khan, the legitimately elected but currently imprisoned Prime Minister of Pakistan, who's having his rights violated as we speak. He's being held in prison, but not only that, he actually is losing his eyesight. He's almost entirely blind in one of his eyes. And so we spoke to Medea Benjamin. We also spoke to Sajjad Burki, secretary of PTI's Organization of International Chapters. And we spoke to Mariam Watu, Imran Khan's sister-in-law. So all of which is to say, make sure that you do subscribe. And we're at over 400,000 subs, which is great. But this really is good for you guys, so you don't miss any additional streams. We're going to be doing an additional stream this week also. I'll give you a little hint. It's about the Biennale, and it's with an Israeli filmmaker based in Berlin. Okay, so we are going to urge you, as always, to please become Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And what do you do? What do you get if you do that? You get tons of extra content. You get bonus content, extended interviews. And you also get, for instance, the full interview that we did with Nick Bryant, who was the first journalist to publish Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. He himself is mentioned in the Epstein files, probably more than we know of because only a small percentage of the files have been released. And he talks about really disturbing stuff, but very important stuff. So again, that's at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We are bringing onto the show, we're bringing back onto the show our first guest. We are so excited to be bringing him back on. He's going to be talking about what's happening in Iran, what's happening in the diaspora community, what's happening in Israel, what Israel is doing in Iran. And that is Etan Mabourakh, who is the action organizing manager at the National Iranian-American Council. So welcome, Etan.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining. Always exciting to talk to you. It's such an important thing that you provide this perspective. We have a large buildup as we speak of military forces, U.S. military forces gathering around Iran. And this comes at a time as the U.S. and Iran supposedly just wrapped up a second round of unofficial talks. So give us an overview of what is happening right now.
Well, there was indeed a second round of talks today. And I think whatever the news coming out of talks and Geneva and out of the Trump camp and out of the Iranian side and out of the Netanyahu flight sort of last ditch in an attempt to add demands to the negotiations, whatever the context of those, we can't forget what happened in June, where the U.S. was in the midst of its fifth round of talks with Iran. And then it plunged into regional war. And you mentioned the U.S., the Trump administration now deploying a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East. And in response, some in Congress have been pushing to affirm and stand for the congressional constitutional role of reining in the president from unauthorized war making. We saw it with Venezuela a few weeks ago, actually, that passed the Senate. And now we're seeing it in the wings in Iran, on the Iran issue for the Iran War Powers Resolution from Senator Tim Kaine, Senator Paul in the Senate, which was recently introduced, and from Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, who are also leading the Epstein files push on a war powers resolution in the House. And I think, if you look at polling for the American people, it's widely unpopular, a war with Iran. I mean, a new Quinnipiac poll attested to that, showing 70% of Americans oppose military strikes. But the game of manufacturing consent and speaking over voices in Iran who have been organizing and fighting for democracy and self-determination is also underfoot. And you mentioned the Wall Street Journal piece. There's a whole much wider campaign to discredit anyone who speaks against war and continued broad crippling sanctions, which has been the sort of status quo thus far.
Yeah, very scary. And, people may have seen this already, but alongside these, threats of open war, we've seen an equally, if not more, violent campaign of sanctions that's been lobbied against Iran. And we know why. I mean, they're saying the quiet part out loud, right? People sometimes pretend this is to hurt the elites, to hurt the powerful, to hurt the bad guys, not the people, not the masses. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made it very clear what the actual goal of these sanctions are. The other day, let's take a look.
What do you want to say about sanctions? Something else you've been working on, of course. What are you planning there in terms of Iran and the impact there? Do sanctions actually work? And the same question with regard to 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on countries who purchase energy products from Russia.
Okay, so two things there. There are Treasury sanctions. And if you look at a speech that I gave at the Economic Club of New York last March, I said that I believe the Iranian currency was on the verge of collapse, that if I were an Iranian citizen, I would take my money out. President Trump ordered Treasury and our OFAC division, Office of Foreign Asset Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran, and it's worked. Because in December, their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage. They are not able to get imports, and this is why the people took to the street. So this is economic statecraft. No shots fired, and things are moving in a very positive way here.
So a very positive way here. What are your thoughts on that? Very positive.
I mean, it's on the one hand, Iranians have been fighting and protesting. They have the absolute right to protest and demand a better future for themselves, and have been suffering and have suffered a historic crackdown, arbitrary detentions, threats of executions. They're suffering under this government. And it really, there's a whole campaign to manufacture this maximum pressure approach on Iran and to frame it as if it empowers the Iranian people. But if you look at the reality, if you talk to Iranians, to people with family on the ground, I don't know how you can ignore the fact that people cannot afford they can't afford meat, they can't afford food, they can't afford medicine, they can't afford to bail out and buy the bodies back of people who've been slain. They also cannot afford continued crippling mass sanctions that have been proven to not improve the dreadful human rights situation in Iran. And as you mentioned, the maximum pressure sanctions regime that we have retained has in many ways empowered the hardline actors in Iran to retain control. It has created black markets. It has created the opportunities for the IRGC to dominate sanctioned markets. And it has closed the door for any conversation about updating and improving our sanctions policies to help ordinary Iranians who've been crushed by them. One great example, like of a simple thing that we could allow, is remittances. We allow them for Cuba. Actually, we allow, despite the sanctions regime and new blockade and in max pressure campaign against Cuba, we allow Cuban Americans to send small restricted remittances for under $1,000 per quarter to limited, folks. In Iran, if you look at the average wage earnings per month, if you look at the average wage earnings per year and the strength of the currency, the ability to allow remittances for ordinary Iranians who've been struggling for people in the diaspora would be the far more effective way to help people than the continued limited options of bombing and sanctions. And it completely ignores the civil society in Iran, the middle class, who we all know and it's been clearly documented, do not accept the status quo of life there, of the government there, and it's their right to improve that. But it boggles my mind to continue to hear government officials say we stand with the Iranian people, help is on the way, and to only imagine that help as continued crippling maximum pressure sanctions and bombs and capitulation to Netanyahu and other non-democratic voices.
Right. Well, speaking of Democratic and Republican, so that statement from Bessent was from January 20th at the World Economic Forum. And it was a panel held by Fox News and Maria Bartiromo. But sadly, Bessent doesn't have the monopoly on this kind of discourse. The Republican Party doesn't have the monopoly on this kind of discourse, because Nancy Pelosi said something comparable at a talk hosted by Politico last week. Let's take a listen to what Nancy had to say.
A way to sort of bring about the regime falling without using American force, I guess, is the question there.
Well, use economic forces. Yeah. Use economic forces. There are ways that could cripple their economy. And some of that has been in the works.
It does feel very tenuous, though, the regime there, more than it has in a long time.
I agree with you. Yeah. I agree with you. But again, it's not about a threat from war. Hopefully, it's more about just weaken their economy, and that weakens the support they do have. Because they do have support in the rural areas and the more conservative imams and all the rest of that. Yeah. But we have to make them feel the pain as well. Yeah.
There you go. So it's not about the elites. It's about making the people feel the pain.
Yeah, it's a bipartisan consensus that Iranian pain will somehow lead more, and continued sustained Iranian pain will lead to freedom and self-determination. And it ignores the things we know to be true. We know that the Iranian people have sustained protest movements in the past. We also know that those protest movements have been subject to outside voices trying to speak on behalf of them. Then the Iranian government tries to discredit ordinary Iranians by saying that they've been outside co-opted. The best thing we could do, the United States tomorrow could authorize remittances so we could send money to Iran. It could update sanctions policies and encourage private companies to actually provide their tools so Iranians could get around the internet blackout. Right now, Zoom is actually unrestricted, but they won't provide it in Iran. Google Voice is also another tool. There are other tools like, Starlink has been criminalized in Iran, and the Wall Street Journal, which attacked us, also reported that the U.S. was sending Starlink terminals into Iran. We need to be mindful of our actual goals and things we can materially do to help Iranians tomorrow, and that includes their livelihood, their ability to afford life, and to organize, to protest for the next day, to actually build a democratic consensus and a movement and a referendum, and to get people out of jail and to get them speaking and connected with the outside world. And the fact that Pelosi literally uses the word pain as a connector to freedom is it's gross.
Yeah. So you have also been facing at NIAC a kind of intense smear campaign. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I mean, NIAC has been subject to smears for years, and it's primarily because...
and explain to people what NIAC is. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, NIAC is short for the National Iranian-American Council. And we're the largest and the oldest grassroots Iranian-American organization in the country. We were founded in 2002. We are also the only Iranian-American organization in the country that can stand on a record that has backed ordinary Iranian people, including the protesters, that has opposed executions, and that is fighting a reckless, violent war that would be led by America and Israel against the Iranian people that would not lead to democratic outcomes. And we're opposing broad sanctions just organizing ordinary Iranians. We have a small staff. We're a nonprofit, but we have volunteers working, Iranian women, minorities, Baha'is, Jews like myself, Zoroastrians, Bakhtiaris, you name it. We have all sorts of Kurds. We have all sorts of Iranians who organize of different political persuasions around the country. And we get attacked. And you mentioned the attacks. Recently, we were attacked sort of on two fronts. There was a clip that circulated online that depicts a hardliner. And I'll give some context before you show it briefly. But it depicts a hardliner named Fouad Izzadi. He's an Iranian state TV academic. He's on a podcast here. And he's lamenting, and his students are also lamenting and speculating and complaining, and they're mad that the Iranian government doesn't actually have a lobby. And in the clip, and they also speculate about NIAC in the clip, and they clearly don't understand what they're talking about because they're mad that Iran doesn't have an actual lobby, and they say that NIAC is not that lobby. They mention that in the clip, and they also say that we were founded in 2011 when we were founded in 2002, and then this clip was then used in a Wall Street Journal short op-ed that was barely an argument that lazily invoked this dangerous allegation that we are an Iranian lobby. When, just to clarify, I'm born and raised in Florida. I don't speak Farsi. I've never been to
You
Iran.
don't speak Farsi? What?
No, I actually speak Hebrew. All of our volunteers speak Farsi, and I turn to them. But I'm an American. I'm born and raised here. I'm concerned about American policy. We are an American organization, and we piss off warmongers and hardliners in Iran and warmongers and hardliners here because we advocate for ordinary people, because we advocate against war, against reckless sanctions, and for self-determination and democratic change and reasonable, achievable steps that the U.S. can do tomorrow to help Iranians, including internet freedom, stopping deportations to Iran, and sanctions relief like remittances that would help people tomorrow, not bombs.
Right. Well, let's see, Brad, what do we have? That document, Brad, what is that? I want to figure out what we have. I'm going to bring you on. Okay. Let's see. What's this? Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about this. And then Brad, I just sent you a video. That would be great to prepare. We will go back to that video because that relates to the smear campaign. But
let's talk about this, Katie. Well, yeah, let's talk about this. This is a good defense, frankly. This next document on us suing ICE.
Talk about this, please. Tell us why are you suing ICE?
Well, because they've deported 3 planes of Iranian asylum seekers and dissidents, minorities, Baha'is, LGBTQ members, people who have fled the Islamic Republic seeking refuge in Iran. They've deported 3 planes of them back to Iran as part of an ongoing arrangement with Tehran. And they've provided no information about the numbers of people on these planes, how long they were in detention, why they were in detention. We are suing for this information. We have a responsibility as an Iranian-American group to stand for the civil rights of every Iranian-American person here and their families. And especially in the case at this time when the government in Iran is cracking down, is killing, executing, detaining protesters. And the Trump administration claims to stand with Iranians and say help is on the way. More deportation flights are on the way. We have no clue if we actually have every indication that these flights will continue. And we are trying to advocate against deporting Iranian dissidents back to Iran. And then we get smeared for being an Iranian regime lobby while calling this out. Yeah.
By the way, please, if you haven't already liked the stream, we really need you to like the stream. And then people sometimes like it when I yell at them. So like the stream. I'll be very annoyed. But then I also am mad at someone who And Brad, you're going to be mad at me because I should ignore it, but it drives me a little crazy. Guys, you can read, presumably. You know how to read, which is good, and you're lucky. The description in these videos lists the guests. So someone in the comments asking if this is Vijay, one, you misspelled Vijay's name. Just literally, it's in the title. Two, it's in the description that we have on other guests. Three, you're late or you would have heard me say at the beginning. So just now I should be punishing you by ignoring you, but it just drives me crazy. This reminds me of when I was a teacher. I feel like I'm teaching right now. Use your brains, okay? And don't be rude or lazy. It's just so entitled. Everyone's writing about hardliners suck, this, that, the other, and I'm upset about like manners in the comments. But yes, war is much more important than this. So wow, okay, that's intense that you are suing ICE. Yeah, it is. Again, it's just this rank hypocrisy where, regardless of what one thinks about Iran, there is major rank hypocrisy when you are deporting people to a place that you claim you want to save people from. So, yeah. Okay. So, let's talk about this video that you referred to. Let's watch that video. Okay. And someone wrote, "Calm down, Katie. You're no longer a teacher, lol." Why did I read that? I'm sorry. I'm sick and I'm in a bad mood today. I am a teacher teaching you right now, and I'm bringing on guest lecturers. Okay, go. Etan, you want to set this up? You already did, so we're fine, actually.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll read it. I'll read it, and I'll read the subtitles for all the people who don't speak Farsi, which includes you. I had no idea.
Well, okay. I do need to set it up, actually.
Okay.
So for full context, this clip that you'll show was posted on the lobbying channel for Reza Pahlavi for the
Shah's son.
For the Shah's son, yeah.
Who wants regime change? He wants to take over. He's like the Maria Corina Machado of
yes, and
Iran.
And he's quite a difficult figure to discuss because he in some instances will say things that are supportive of democracy in Iran and try to frame himself as a transitional figure. But then on the other hand, many of his supporters will attack anyone who does not support and chant Javid Shah and support the full restoration of the monarchy and dismiss them as regime apologists, including many Iranian activists who are currently in prison, who people like Nargis Mohammadi, like Mustafa Tajzadeh. There are people who are in prison, who have been persecuted by the regime, who have given their lives for Iranian freedom and democracy, and they dismiss them. And then, like, I just want to give full context to the fellow speaking in this clip is a complete Iranian hardliner, and they would never agree with his takes on anything else. But because he mentions my group, again, in error, saying that we were founded 9 years after we were not, and complaining that we are not the Iranian hardline lobby that he wants us to be. This was then taken and clipped after the fact, just so everyone sees it, by the likes of these groups trying to then frame us as the Iranian lobby. So we're getting attacked on both sides of this clip from Iranian hardliners and people who want war in the U.S. I guess it's got to be a sign that you're doing something right if people are attacking you on both sides, who are really absurd in both ways.
Okay, so let's take a look at this video. And I'm just going to read. On a political discussion program, Fawad Izadi, the lead U.S. political analyst for the Islamic Republic state broadcaster, discusses the regime's lobbying networks in the United States with graduate-level security studies students. We do have lobbyists, but done in our own way. But our way should be discussed off the record, not in front of the cameras. Our way was treat a Parsi, right? Anyways, yes, no, this is being recorded. That's a whole other story. Treat a Parsi. Look, this was the problem with Mr. Rouhani. You have 1 minute remaining. I leave the economic discussions to Mr. Abdul Karimi. Actually, that's better. One of the many problems with Mr. Rouhani was, after he came back to Iran from his first trip to the U.S., he was recorded at the airport saying, "We need an Iranian lobby." When Mr. Rouhani came back from the U.S., he said, "We need an Iranian lobby." Do you see the problem here? He should have said, "We need a lobby for Iran." His statements bring suspicion on Iranians in the United States. They are seen as suspicious. When these lobbyists are identified, the regime then needs to serve them more than they serve the regime. The lobby you mentioned, what does he said? The lobby you mentioned.
And this is one of his students. This is one fella interjecting here.
Okay, the lobby you mentioned earlier. I will discuss it very briefly for 30 seconds. Look, Arabs have person-centered lobbying networks. They make deals with Jared Kushner. Israelis have structured lobbies. Their lobbies have structure, money, and financing like AIPAC. These are Israeli and Arab deals. These kind of lobbies are impossible for Iran. For Iran, the U.S. don't allow these lobbies to be created. You made a lobby there called NIAC. That's you guys. Okay. Which dishonored Iran and Iranians.
Because we support a deal.
It is really shameful. It resulted in JCPOA, which also failed.
So yeah, pause that. So they're upset at people who support any sort of relaxing intentions, avoiding in war, sanctions relief, monitoring, travel exchange, remittances, opening up of channels. They're upset by that because they're on the hardline side of this.
Right.
But
keep going. Yeah. Let's go back to that. What you suggest is very weak and doesn't end in tangible results. Okay. That's it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So now from that, the Wall Street Journal thought it'd be a good idea to write a hit piece on you guys.
They did, and we got our reply posted that same week, and folks are welcome to read it afterwards. And I think it's just indicative of. And I also want to clarify that everyone just watched that post. We read it word for word. That was clipped and then amplified by groups like FDD, UANI, and this Pahlavi lobby, amplifying this clip.
UANI, I'm sorry, can you explain what those are?
FDD is the Foundation for Defensive Democracies. People like Mark Dubowitz, who have just for their entire careers wanted nothing more than the United States and Israel to go to war with Iran and to sabotage all diplomacy. And they're sharing this clip, even though we all watched it together. We see it really reveals nothing other than these ramblings of hardliners against us. And they try to run it as an operation to turn Iranians against one another and to silence our group as the only major independent anti-war Iranian-American organization at the exact moment when we are trying to mobilize to stop another disastrous war that no one wants, that will only empower hardliners in Iran to continue to crack down on dissent and peaceful organizing of all kinds, and would just be a disaster for America. Everyone is sick of wars, and as Lindsey Graham said, wars planned and wanted by Israel. And Lindsey Graham is also a firm ally, right, of Pahlavi and of the pro-war regime change by the U.S. crowd in Iran. And also, I just want to clarify, they compare us, and other people who've been using this clip have been comparing NIAC to AIPAC. And NIAC's official position since 2002 has been to support regime change led by the Iranian people, not by outside forces, since the Women Life Freedom movement. And we've also been absolutely clear in calling out the crimes of this government. So it's an absurd accusation, and it's meant to disqualify Iranian Americans, to scare them. There have been death threats. I've received death threats. People like Stephen Kinzer, who I've organized events with, who wrote All the Shah's Men, who's a scholar on U.S. regime change efforts in Iran, were attacked. Peace activists. They want to disqualify the debate, and it's and they're using old, like, random clips. They'll never use one of our statements. They'll never use an event clip, of the work that we actually do.
What do the threats say to you?
People have people have threatened to kill us if we didn't denounce the Islamic Republic on public events, to dump dump our bodies in the harbor. There's public reporting, like, there's a lot. Yeah,
sounds very pro-democracy.
Very pro-democracy. Yeah, very pro-democracy.
Well, the last thing I want to do is actually share a clip of Lindsey Graham, since you brought him up and we're talking about how much people like Lindsey love the people of Iran. And here is a clip of him from Monday. Let me just, he's obviously a huge proponent for bombing Iran. He didn't invent the song, bomb, 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 Iran. That was John McCain. But here he is speaking to the media in Tel Aviv on Monday. Let's hear what he had to say.
You ready? Thumbs up back there? Thumbs up from everybody. Okay. Well, I'm Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. I'm back. I come here every 2 weeks where I need to or not. So why did I come this time? To put a fine point of where we're at as a world regarding the Iranian regime.
All right. There you go. You're muted.
Every 2 weeks, taking his trip. I mean, it's honestly like Lindsey Graham cares more about the freedom through bombs and sanctions to Iranians than he cares about South Carolinians. Clearly his posturing, he's a desperate small man who feels bigger off the prospect of American soldiers being sent to die in a war that will bring no democracy and no security or stability to a region that we have every bit of leverage. We as Americans have every bit of leverage to enforce. We can set the table with very clear demands and negotiations in our own interest. And I mean, Trump didn't bother to attach human rights or basic accountability measures to his negotiations, but that certainly could be done. There's room to actually support the UN fact-finding mission mandate, which was recently renewed on Iran. There's room to provide asylum to Iranian protesters at risk in the United States and to not deport asylum seekers back. There's room to do more on internet freedom beyond just Starlink. He could take action on human rights in Iran if he wanted to, and the U.S. has every capability to do that. But it's a matter of who he listens to. He's got Lindsey Graham, he's got Stephen Miller, Miriam Adelson, folks in one camp, and then there has been a contingent of people who've opposed war with Iran, and hopefully he keeps listening to them. Because it's just not in the American interest.
Right. Well, Etan, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for this update and for everything NIAC does.
Thank you, Katie.
Have a great night. Okay, everyone, please like the stream, and you're definitely going to like it because we have coming back onto the show. There's been a little change in the lineup. Vijay Prashad was going to be the final guest, but he's actually now the second guest. But don't go anywhere after Vijay because we're going to have a live report from Venezuela, from Caracas. But welcome back onto this show, the wonderful Vijay Prashad. Welcome, Vijay.
Great to be with you. Thanks a lot.
Of course. Thanks for coming. So, Vijay, you are a Renaissance man, which means we could talk about so many things with you. I think, I'll just start off by asking you, before we get into any real specifics, about your overall impressions of the latest escalation in the blockade against Cuba. And in what ways you think this is a departure, and what ways you think this is a continuation of past administrations. And I have to turn on my heat, so I'm going to be off camera. So I'm listening to you, but you won't see me. Okay, take it away.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the first thing is that the United States has had this sort of blockade for over 60 years. It's illegal, it's unilateral, it's a blockade that impacts third-party countries. So the United States squeezes other countries, doesn't allow them to conduct basic commerce with Cuba. This has been going for 60 years. What is most emphatically different about what's happening now is that Donald Trump has said that he is going to prevent fuel from entering Cuba and wants to create a humanitarian catastrophe. He basically said that openly. And he is, in a sense, told Venezuela, Mexico, other countries, you are not going to be allowed to deliver fuel to Cuba. The point is to shut the country down, to prevent hospitals from functioning, schools, basic activity, to prevent airlines from flying, public transportation, all of it, to basically suffocate Cuba. Now, it's a good thing that Claudia Sheinbaum, president of Mexico, is using every means possible not to allow this to happen. The Russians have said they will send fuel. Let's see what happens. The Chinese have already delivered a large number of solar panels. The idea is to move immediately to renewables as much as possible, and so on. There are people who are heartsick about this around the world. But the gangster regime in Washington is just not budging on this. I mean, they are a mafia and they are not moving.
Yeah, they're a mafia. And as you tweeted the other day, you said that a while ago you told Pete Hegseth if he wants to go after narco traffickers, he should go after Marco Rubio and Narco Rubio. And then I heard you also refer to the narco trafficking that is done by HSBC. Can you elaborate on these?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with HSBC. There's a very, very good book published by a mainstream publishing house, written by a mainstream reporter, about HSBC Mexico's involvement in money laundering, the money from the drug trade. I mean, they went to such a point, Katie, that in their little retail banks across the border, they built these banks in Mexico just across the US border. They designed the teller so that you could slip a briefcase of cash to the tellers, who were basically instructed to take this cash in, count it up, and bring it into the Mexican money supply. It was basically dollars entering Mexican money supply, laundered. It didn't even have to go through the facade of having small businesses and so on. HSBC is still operating in Mexico, paid a fine, as they often do. There are little boutique banks in the United States that occasionally get busted for money laundering, but then they come back into action. I mean, look, you don't need to listen to any so-called alternative media. Just watch the show Ozarks, and you get an idea of how money laundering functions. These are the real criminals in this. The money from the drug trade, the massive liquid amounts of hundreds of billions of dollars, keeps the banks afloat. That's what keeps the banks going. Capitalism is founded on criminality, and it exists. It's reproduced by criminality. That's where the liquidity comes from. The liquidity doesn't come from entrepreneurship and so on. It comes from illegal criminal activity.
Right. Yeah. And Marco Rubio, of course, his own brother-in-law was involved in that. And he's never really had to do or say anything about it. I mean, it's just funny because they provide absolutely no evidence to support the claims that they're the people that they're killing. And it's murder. I mean, they're committing murder. I think that gets lost in the media because the media doesn't really focus on this. Excuse me, I'm sick. This gets lost in the media, but there's murder happening every day that we bomb one of these narco traffickers. I mean, we did it a couple days ago, and no one pays attention. It's so dehumanizing. I mean, you've covered this extensively. All these lies that are used to fabricate and justify what's happening. And
just to put a point underneath that, I've traveled to some of these islands off the coast of Colombia and Venezuela. There are islands, they are known as the Black Islands, off the coast of Colombia near Cartagena. These islands are called the Black Islands because they are largely populated by Afro-Colombians who lived there because they had escaped from the enslavement and the mistreatment in the plantations, including the banana plantations along the coastline of Colombia. And they created maroons in these islands. And I was taken from one of these islands by one of the leaders of the community, an Afro-Colombian man who was very proud of what he was doing. And he took me back to the mainland in one of those little boats. Now imagine, we could very easily have been bombed by the United States and called drug traffickers. That's how people in that area travel. That's how they bring goods and services to their quite isolated islands. And these islands are precisely where Gustavo Petro has pledged to make them go almost 100% solar. I just want to say, you know, that there's things happening in these islands, but the United States is not seeing it. You're just using these people as televised propaganda for a war against sovereignty, not a war against drugs.
Right. Yeah, it is really disgusting. I wanted to play a clip from Trump on what he believes his actions are doing, or what he claims that they are. So let's take a listen to this.
You're warning Cuba to make a deal. What does that deal look like? What do you want them to do?
Cuba is right now a failed nation. They don't even have jet fuel to get for airplanes to take off. They're clogging up their runway. We're talking to Cuba right now. They have Marco Rubio talking to Cuba right now, and they should absolutely make a deal because it's really a humanitarian threat. And we have a lot of great Cuban Americans, and they're going to be very happy when they're going to be able to go back and say hello to their relatives and do things that they should have been allowed to do for a long time. I'm very interested in the people that are here that were treated so badly by Castro and the Cuban authorities. They have been treated horribly. So we'll see how it all turns out. But Cuba and us, we are talking. In the meantime, there's an embargo. There's no oil. There's no money. There's no anything.
If a deal isn't made, would you consider an operation like the one in Venezuela?
I don't want to answer that. Why would I answer that? If I was, it wouldn't be a very tough operation, as you could figure. But I don't think that'll be necessary.
Okay, so there he is basically saying he's not going to say out loud if he's going to do to Cuba what he did to Venezuela. That wouldn't be smart, but it doesn't think it's going to be necessary. Talks about the poor Cuban Americans who are treated so horribly by Cuba. What's your response to this?
Well, he just lied. He said 3 lies, and I want to emphasize the 3 lies of Donald. I believe his middle name is J. Trump. Here are the 3 lies. Lie number 1. He says that the United States, Marco Rubio, and the Cuban government are in dialogue. Not true at all. Right. The Cuban government has said directly there is no negotiation going on at all. They have reached out to the United States. They have said they are willing to talk to the US, but they said no preconditions. And absolutely, the Constitution of 2019 is sacrosanct. Socialism is their avowed goal. They are not going to withdraw that. That's number 1, lie. Number 2, lie. Cuba is a failed state. Cuba is not a failed state. Cuba is a state that has faced sanctions for 60 years. At the end of the clip, that's exactly what he said. The United States has squeezed this country. The reason there's no jet fuel is because the United States is not allowing any processed fuel into the country. For God's sake, Donald, you're the one not allowing the jet fuel in, not that the Cubans have no jet fuel. So second lie, that when he says that it's a failed state. And the third lie is when he said that the Cubans in the United States have been treated badly by Fidel Castro and the Cuban government and so on. Not true at all. The Cuban government has always welcomed Cuban Americans to visit the country unless they come with guns and try to land at the Bay of Pigs, and then they are not welcome. They are not welcome as invaders. They have been welcomed as tourists, family members, and so on. It's the United States government, except for very brief periods, particularly under Obama, that has made it so hard for US citizens who are Cuban to be in touch with their families. So 3 lies in, I don't know how long that clip was, Katie. It wasn't very long. It was less than 3 minutes. Trump is a master of lies and half-truths and so on, master. And when he says that thing about why would I tell you this, that itself is a game, and it's nasty. It's not something one expects from heads of governments, particularly heads of governments with enormous nuclear arsenals. But that's what you have. The United States has a gangster as a president, and suck it in, guys. You know, your own country people voted him in, or whatever system exists in the US. Calling it democracy is shambolic.
Right. Well, he's probably being played because I mean, as everyone watching here probably knows, Trump's not an ideologue. He's an opportunist. He's very impressionable. And I think that, Drop Site News reported on this, that Rubio is probably lying to Trump and pretending that there are negotiations when there aren't, because he has an obsession with regime changing Cuba. So I want to give you a chance to see something that this basically, I mean, I feel like he may be the president, kind of like Dick Cheney was the president when Bush was president. Wanted to show something that Rubio said, some comments that he made at the Munich conference, and it's pretty eerie.
5 centuries before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain, and the rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across
evil anti-colonial uprisings. I mean, I almost like that he's so open about it.
And drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end, and that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before, and this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on this? I mean, I don't know what century it's out of, but...
Yeah, well, firstly, I just want to say very clearly that Marco Rubio was born in Miami, Florida. He's not a Cuban. He's a person from the United States of America.
Right.
Secondly, Marco Rubio's parents migrated from Cuba in 1956,
Exactly.
almost 3 years before the Cuban Revolution. They didn't flee from that revolution. And in fact, Marco Rubio's grandfather had migrated as well. I mean, he's by his own stretch of rejection of so-called DEI, or whatever that is, that diversity, equity, and inclusion, Marco Rubio is not Cuban nothing. He's an American. He's a person of the United States. Yeah? He may be of Cuban extraction or whatever, but he was not born in Havana. He was not born in Cuba. He was born in Miami. And that should be made very clear, that we should not mistake him for somebody who has a right to speak about Cuba. The other point is that what he's saying is not so surprising. You know, Javier Milei of Argentina was at Davos a few years ago, where he said, you know, what have we done to Western civilization and so on. This is Steve Bannon's entire approach to politics, you know, the need to bring back the Great White Hope. I mean, that fellow who was, I don't know the names of these guys. Some guy was sitting in front of Congress. He was asked to talk about how he had talked about white culture and how it's in decline and so on. He refused to directly say that I think white culture is better, whatever the hell white culture is. He refused to say it. He didn't have the guts to say it. Come out and say it, Marco. You and your cabinet should come out and just say it. You think white culture is better. Okay, how is this going to sound in Cuba? How is it going to sound amongst the Afro-Cubans who were liberated by the Cuban Revolution, liberated by the deep racism of the Cuban oligarchy that preceded the revolution? How is this going to sound? How is it going to sound in Colombia amongst the Afro-Colombians? These people are out and out racist.
Yeah.
They are racist. That is the nature of their fascism. It's wrong to actually say, oh, this is like Hitler. It is not like Hitler. This is like the Ku Klux Klan. These are, these are races that come out of a deep seam in US history, going back to when the Pilgrims or whoever arrived and said, just let's get rid of all these other people. They're cluttering up the landscape that God has given up. Okay, that God has given up. These are people whose belief in divine providence and so on comes from that sort of fascistic racism with very, very deep roots in the United States. So Marco Rubio is not Cuban. Marco Rubio is a man of the United States. He has imbibed the whole tradition of US racism. That was what was on display. People say, and you sort of suggested it, that, well, at least he's goddamn honest, yeah? To use a nice US expression, goddamn honest. At least he's that. Well, but he's not the first, and that has to be said. They all say that, and sometimes it's disguised. They'll say that the United States is the greatest country. Well, what do you mean by greatest country? They'll say we worry about immigration. When Samuel Huntington, professor at Harvard University, wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations, well, he wrote another book before he died about the great problem of the Mexican and Latino entrance into the United States, bringing, all kinds of nasty, old, sort of backward ideas of Catholicism. I mean, he was having a problem even with Catholicism.
Right.
Wonder what J.D. Vance would say. What J.D. Vance would say is, no, wait a minute. The Catholics that come from Mexico, their Catholicism is infused with all kinds of Aztec and weird religions. We are the real thing, the people who convert to the real Catholicism. It's not the Catholicism of Pope Francis and people like that. It's John Paul II. It's the Catholicism of anger and brutality. That's allowed, not this Mexican stuff. That was Samuel Huntington. So, Marco Rubio has a good intellectual pedigree for racism. The US Academy has been dancing alongside this racist scene for a very long period. I set aside the idea that, these are fascists like the Germans. No, these are fascists like the Ku Klux Klan.
Right. And of course, Hitler himself looked at the United States, racism in the United States, right, for inspiration.
And not only that, he said that in Mein Kampf, please, people should not read it, but it is instructive. He writes in Mein Kampf that, the German people need a Lebensraum, breathing space in Germany. We have to go and kill the Slavs because they are a nether people and make breathing space. And he said, well, our inspiration is the United States, where the Saxon people went and they massacred the Native Americans and created Lebensraum. I mean, it's god-awfully, correct of him to say that. And also scary, yeah?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And by the way, that person who was questioned was Jeremy Carl, the Trump administration's pick for a top State Department position. And he's unlikely to get it because of his comments. But what's hilarious is he talks about great replacement theory. But what's really, it's not hilarious. It's disturbing is that one of the reasons he's not going to get the position is because of a Republican who said in a statement, Republican Senator John Curtis of Utah said in a statement following the heated Senate Foreign Relations Committee confirmation hearing Thursday that he would not support Carl's nomination for Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations because after reviewing his record and participating in today's hearing, I do not believe that Jeremy Carl is the right person to represent our nation's best interests in international forums, and I find his anti-Israel views and insensitive remarks about the Jewish people unbecoming of the position for which he has been nominated. So, anyway.
I mean, in a sense, this is a problem with the Ku Klux Klan lineage. that it is much more deeply bathed in anti-Semitism than people are willing to acknowledge.
Right, yeah.
Much more deeply bathed. I mean, Steve Bannon's comments and so on are nasty and terrible. And it's too bad that leading figures in the Jewish community in the United States haven't taken these people to task, but have said, well, they are allies for now in the defense of Israel. Well, don't ally with people who'll bite you later.
Right. Yeah, Tom. So the Zionists to accept people like that into the fold. Yeah, that is disturbing. You wrote a very. I don't know if you've ever written. Have you read your poetry on shows? Because you wrote a really cool poem. And I didn't check with you if you feel comfortable. But I can put it on the screen. And I thought it was great. It was you released it as part of your Tricontinental Research Institute newsletter from last week. And I wanted to show people the poem, which you can, one second, let me just open this up here. And tell people as I open this up what Tricontinental is, both the newsletter, but where its namesake.
Well, the Tricontinental was a conference held in Havana, Cuba in 1966. It was a conference that brought together fighters for national liberation and socialism. I mean, the combination of national liberation and socialism comes together in this conference. Delegates came from Africa, Asia, Latin America, hence the name Tricontinental. And 10 years ago, when we were building the institute, which was the Institute of the International People's Assembly, we decided to call the institute Tricontinental in homage of the conference, and also because in a few years the organization in solidarity with the people of Latin America, Africa, Asia, or SPAL, was closed down inside Cuba. That was the descendant of Tricontinental. So in a way, we hope that we are holding up the flag. People can go to our website, thetricontinental.org. There's a lot of publications. And yes, there's a weekly newsletter, which last week was basically a long poem on the so-called drug trade, but more on the war on the poor.
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. It's a great magazine, and I really want to go to this book event that you guys did, but I wasn't able to, that you did at the People's Forum. So this newsletter will make you angry. The 7th newsletter, the drug trade and the war on drugs that polices it, unleashes a value chain of suffering on peasant communities in the global South. You cannot explain such systematic brutality without anger. And so here is you talk about this poem and what inspired it. Do you want to tell us about it? Do you want to read part of it?
Yeah, well, last year I traveled with our team, a section of our team, to Cauca in Colombia, which is a province where there's a lot of campesinos who grow the coca plant. And we had meetings with PUPSOC, which is the Popular Unity Process of Southwest Colombia. We met campesinos, we talked to people who had lost their lives in the struggle to survive. It's a very rough place. There are signs as you drive down the road that say, don't put your windows up. There are people on motorcycles who drive by you with guns in their laps, looking into your car, wondering who you are. I mean, the place is controlled by narco traffickers. And so we worked with the campesino organizations, COCAM and others, and we built a really nice text called The War on the Poor, Narcotics, Campesinos, and Capitalism, which came out in February this month. That's available on our website. It's a nice long argument about the role of, what we started talking about of banks like HSBC and so on, finance, and the war on the poor. And then, I wanted to introduce that text to our readership. And so rather than write it as a straightforward narrative, I ended up just writing it as a pretty angry poem.
Yeah.
In a way.
Do you want to read part of it? Is there a particular part, like the beginning, or?
Well, it's difficult to say, but I'm also looking at it because your screen is too little for me.
Oh, okay.
And no, it's okay. I'm also looking at it.
Okay, so we'll follow your lead wherever you start.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the last second. Well, let's just open the beginning and just read a little bit from the beginning. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Because it also reflects on Marco Rubio's comments in Munich. Yeah. Okay. So here it goes. They arrived. Oh yes, they arrived. One morning the sea opened like a blue wound, and ships crawled out heavy with hunger. They brought civilization in their pockets, wrapped like a knife in silk. Civilization, they said, as if naming a flower. But it was hunger. It was gunpowder. It was paper contracts that bit deeper than teeth. Their ships drank gold from the ribs of the continent and exhaled chains into the bodies of men. The earth, the ancient earth, patient as a mother, was forced to open her veins for strangers. They took the land, they took the labor, they took the forest still wet with bird song. They drained the mountains until even the stones felt poor. And what did they leave? Poverty, like a cracked bowl left in the dust for children to lick.
It's really good.
That's great that you think so.
Yeah. We'll have to have you on and read it, the whole thing. We can, but
maybe.
But I didn't even know you were a poet.
Everybody's able to write poetry because you have something that you want to say. Yeah.
Right.
When your emotions run away with you, it's hard to write prose. It's hard to write prose. Many years ago, I was having a coffee with Eduardo Galeano in Montevideo in Uruguay. And I asked him, listen, Galeano, how is it possible that you write about torture and killing and all this horrible stuff, but you write so beautifully? And, his answer was very good. And it's very good for journalists and writers in general. His answer was that, reality is so ugly. Why would you reproduce it? Yeah. Right. Why would you reproduce the ugliness? Why would you make somebody go through torture when you write about torture? So you write about torture in a way that gets under the skin of the person, makes them want to move, to do something to stop it, not to make them feel tortured and therefore paralyzed. Yeah. You want to make them move. You want to make them gripped, get out of bed, go out there, join an organization, join a protest, do something, and that I think is most powerful about prose and poetry. The form is not as important. Journalism is about getting people to move. That's why I reject these terms. Katie, people say activist journalists, whatever, movement, alternative. Right. I hate all these terms. We're just writers and journalists. And all journalists ask people to move, whether it's to the right or to the left or wherever. All journalism is asking you to move.
Yeah. Or I guess if they're radical centrists, they're asking you to stay centered, but it's not neutral.
Yeah, they're not asking you to lie in bed. I mean,
right.
Even when you're flicking through your Instagram reels or TikTok, whatever's, you see things that stimulate you. Yeah. And, I don't have a problem with any of that. Just don't get too addicted to it. Right. Stimulation and that is much more important than a kind of addiction, paralysis. And I think the profession of journalism is the opposite of creating paralysis. It's movement, in your brain, in wanting to get involved in things and so on. And that's what I learned from old Galeano. One of the greats, I must say,
who wrote this amazing book for people who don't know, The Open Veins of Latin America, which is beautiful. Yeah. Despite the fact that it's about colonialism. Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote so many beautiful books. He wrote about football, which is extraordinary. He's one of my favorite. I have 5 or 6 favorite journalists, and he's definitely at the top of the list.
Yeah. Who else is on that list?
Well, there's Ryszard Kapuscinski, who I don't know if people read much anymore, from Poland. He was a terrific writer. He was there in Angola when the Portuguese withdrew and wrote a terrific book about that as well. Really, really fabulous journalist. I of course enjoyed very much my time with Robert Fisk when I lived in Beirut. Fisky took me to see Sabra and Shatila, and he was one of the first journalists to go there. And so we went for a walk, and he described what he had experienced. At moments like this, I sometimes wish that we had more resources and we had a television crew and cameras and we could capture moments like that. But you have to just sort of remember it, because we don't have the opportunity for that. But these are some of the great reporters that I recall and have enjoyed, who have been out there in the field and have covered, sad things like war and so on, but have again done it with a great deal of compassion towards ordinary people, and have tried to understand the big picture, the so-called geopolitical picture, from the standpoint of people who are not necessarily involved. I mean, I enjoyed listening to your guest talking about Iran. At the center of this is the people in Iran, the millions and millions of Iranians who just do not want their country to be obliterated.
Right.
Iran has developed to such an extent that despite all the problems in the country, has been immense development for the people since the overthrow of the Shah of Iran. They don't want the return of the Shah. They are thinking about their everyday lives. They don't want to be bombed to be freed. I mean, for God's sake, that didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Afghanistan. It doesn't work.
Right. Well, Vijay, I want to ask you two more things, because you've been so generous with your time, and I have to use all my self-control because I could talk to you for hours, but I will respect your time commitments. You, I know, are someone who has spoken out against the imprisonment and the denial of medical attention to Imran Khan. Tell us just really briefly, and we've been covering this on the show, why he's a threat to the elites, why progressive media has ignored his story. And then I want to ask you about your recent comments about Noam Chomsky, and something I hear a lot is, obviously people are very disappointed. You express that yourself. And then a lot of people are saying, and these are people who already don't like Chomsky. A lot of people are saying, oh yeah, of course he was tight with Epstein, because you can see this in the way he was an anarchist, or you can see this in the way that he was a soft on Zionism. So I just wanted you to respond to those very different questions.
Okay, the Imran Khan is easier for me, although I know both the people I'm going to be talking about. Imran Khan was one of my heroes as a cricketer. He was the captain of the Pakistani cricket team. He was a great fast bowler. He was a remarkable person in Pakistan, a person of compassion, used his influence and whatever money he had to build hospitals and so on. And then he entered politics. Initially, he was basically backed by the military in the initial period. But then he realized that, look, the people of Pakistan are paying a huge cost, and there needs to be freedom for the people of Pakistan. Pakistan cannot be yoked to the United States, has to be independent, has to develop a sovereign ability to use, for instance, to buy oil from Russia when need be, or develop with the Chinese and so on. All of that, all of that was part of Imran's learning as prime minister. And as he began to move in that direction, right after Russia entered Ukraine, he was in Moscow talking to Vladimir Putin and so on. And then next thing we hear, he has been effectively overthrown in a coup d'etat, imprisoned, quite badly treated in jail. He is now under threat of losing one of his eyes. He was a hero in the Pakistani world long before he entered politics. It's a disgrace the way they are treating him. He's a national hero. I mean, I think one has to have a sense of who you're treating in that way. Okay, he's not a terrorist or anything. He's a national hero. Didn't agree with his politics, you threw him in prison. What the hell is happening in Pakistan? He needs to be out of prison now. His political party was banned, and despite that, it won the election, despite that. But because it couldn't run openly, they couldn't actually have a political representation and so on. And it's a disgrace what's happening in Pakistan. Obviously, Imran is, and I would not agree on all things, but I must say he did read my book, Washington Bullets, in jail, and was moving in the direction of condemning, the interventions of the United States in places like Pakistan. But Anyway, he needs to be out of prison. There is no question about that. He's a sincere, decent person. This should not be happening. And why people are not raising this issue? One reason is people don't care about countries like Pakistan. They care about Pakistan when it is effectively the runway towards your national interests in Afghanistan. Otherwise, Pakistan is absolutely irrelevant to the United States, okay? Right. So people just don't care about it. It's one of the largest countries in the world. Nobody cares. That's really sad. And that should not be the case. It is an important place in the world, like all places, and Imran Khan should be free immediately.
Yeah.
Come down to Nome.
Thank you so much, Vijay, to you for your generosity with your time. And as always, you have an open invitation. This was amazing. Thanks for coming on. And I really look forward to reading the book, the Tricontinental book that you wrote the intro for. And you're going to have to come back on and do the full poem at some point.
Okay. And maybe some other poems. Thanks a lot.
Yes. We'll do a session.
Thanks.
Great. Bye, Vijay. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. And we're just going to keep the show going because this is been such a great show. So many great guests, so many interesting discussions. And we are bringing back onto the show Chris Gilbert. We talked to him before. He's a professor of political studies at the Universidad Bolivariana de Venezuela and co-host and co-creator of the Marxist educational podcast and television program Escuela de Cuadros. So he's also the author of the book Commune or Nothing, Venezuela's Communal Movement and its Socialist Project, and a contributing editor at Monthly Review magazine. So welcome back, Chris.
Happy to be here, Katie.
Thank you. So a lot has happened since the last time we spoke. Venezuela is getting less attention in the news because of so many other things that are happening. But what do we need to know about the state of the country right now as someone who lives in Caracas?
Sure. I want to begin by saying that it's important what you're doing here is to follow up because having lived through this bombing of the city, it's the only time I've been in a city that's been bombed. I've become aware how people tend to just drop stories. That's the basic practice of any news media.
Yeah.
And it's extremely damaging. It basically destroys any rational approach to history. Of course, they've tried to neglect what the lead up to. They tend to erase the lead up to an event like that. And then they tend to not look at the continuities afterwards. So I've been always insisting that we need to look at the continuities. For example, when the US decided to bomb Venezuela and illegally kidnapped the president and first combatant, they were operating within a limited set of conditions. They actually couldn't put troops on the ground here because people are too prepared here. People are too armed. And they also couldn't do a regime change because there is not really an opposition here that really has any credibility or force here. So they did what they could. They did two things. Effectively, they did the bombing operation, the Blitzkrieg operation, kidnapped the president. And they also are doing a new level of blockade, which goes on. They were stopping the oil tankers. So that's the scenario. That's what happened. And then I want to say that from our side, the response has also been conditioned by history. And we should look at the conditioning that happened. For example, one of the things that's happened is a return. Right now, oil that comes out of Venezuela will be sold. The commercialization of Venezuelan oil will be controlled by the United States. And then the money will be deposited into an account in Qatar. And part of that money will go back to Venezuela. But I should point out, this is a terrible concession that we've had to make under duress. But I should point out that there's a great deal of continuity. In fact, Nicolas Maduro was in negotiations about the oil situation before the attack happened. And he actually did hold out the prospect of doing a reform of the hydrocarbons law, which is exactly what Delcy has done. So in this world of speculation, one of the things that's been happening now is people speculate about all kinds of bizarre ideas they construct conspiracies about what happened. But in fact, what's happened is completely on the table and completely evident. It's a very difficult situation. And I think Delcy has done what she had to do and also what's correct to do. Revolutionaries have the option to do a tactical retreat. No revolution can go forward without the option in the playbook or the lexicon of applying a tactical retreat. Lenin said that many times. Lenin did the tactical retreat, which many people are mentioning at this moment, of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, a kind of separate peace with Germany. But that wasn't the only one. The NEP, the new economic program, was a tactical retreat. And then Lenin immediately, in the early years of the Russian Revolution, he also offered concessions to foreign governments over resources and actually explored the possibility of of selling part of Siberia to the United States. So making concessions, compromises, a retreat is always part of a revolutionary playbook. And I think that's what the government has done.
Yeah, there is a lot of accusations of collaboration or selling out. And I think people sometimes miss the revolutionary aspect of strategic decisions. I know that sounds so unappealing, but it is part of it. It sounds so unsexy or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one of the challenges we certainly face a challenging situation. That's one of the things I've been insisting on. There's no giant mystery here. Most of the facts on the table, if you look at history, if you look at the historical conditioning, if you look at the options that were on the table. Now, there are some important challenges that we're facing, and not only ourselves in the region, because I do believe that we're facing a new kind of imperialist aggression, not just here, but in Cuba. And there's been military threats against Mexico. There have been military threats against Colombia. So we're facing a new situation. I think it's worth looking at what one of the, basically where there's often a direct military threat, and there's kind of like a new colonial discourse, a new directly colonial discourse.
Yeah.
The colonial mentality is that the United States has, by some unknown birthright, they have the right to our resources here. Trump repeatedly referred to them as somehow belonging to the United States and having been robbed from the United States by Venezuela. So that's a directly colonial idea, and a directly colonial idea towards leadership. They feel they have the right, which is illegal by any notion of sovereignty, basic notion of sovereignty or international law, but they have the right, they feel like they have the right to seize and replace leaders. So in this new situation, I think that we're going to face a period of reflection in the whole region. Personally, I think, and this is perhaps getting ahead of myself, I think that we have to consider that we lived a period following the fall of the Soviet Union, approximately 30 years, in which, partly because of the very strong hegemony the United States had in the world, it managed things with some limited, mostly nominal respect for national sovereignty in our region. Now, anyone who knows history has to point out how nominal, but it tended not to do direct military interventions. There are two major exceptions. Haiti, they sent Marines and installed Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And the big exception is Colombia, where the United States was always supporting a war of the Colombian state, the oligarchical state, against the Colombian people. But there was a different parameters then in which you could say that there was more emphasis on soft power. Now we've passed the page on that. And I think that our countries in our region will have to prepare themselves for a new level of armed struggle, a new level of military preparation, but that'll be a slow process. Locally, there's a need to process this in the revolutionary sector, to understand it as a tactical treat, and to think about how we can recuperate lost ground. These are challenges. There are also communicational challenges. When all of us turn to the great examples of Lenin and Fidel on the left, and Lenin always emphasized you have to declare that you made the retreat. You need to be totally clear with your people. And Fidel Castro was a wonderful student of Lenin in our continent, in our region, because he did that too. Like when they couldn't do the 10,000 tons of sugar harvest that they tried to do in the 68, I believe. He said it to the people. He said, we failed in the goal. But now we're living in a different moment, a more mediatic moment, in which it's politically almost impossible to make that kind of direct declaration. So one of the challenges we're facing internally in Venezuela is how to develop this understanding that we've made a tactical retreat, communicate it well, and figure out how to go forward.
What do you mean by more mediatic moment, and how does that have an effect on the ease or difficulty of communicating these retreats?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, in the past, I believe, in the moment, clearly in the time of Lenin, there was not such a degree of mass media. Lenin spoke on the radio, but there's still, you can still access a few talks of Lenin on the radio. But I do think that there was a rather clear division between what the party said, the party line, and then the policies the party projected to the masses. And right now, I feel like if it wasn't done by the mass media, it's certainly been done by social networks. All those lines have been blurred. And so I'm not saying you can't have a multi-level discourse, but it's certainly more complicated and requires a different set of tactics. I want to point out that here in this complicated situation we're facing, where there's been a partial loss of sovereignty, we've lost sovereignty over the sales of the oil, but we've retained political sovereignty. In fact, you can see how that by looking, I call it the squalidometer, like what the opposition says.
Right.
It really bothers them, a lot of stuff. Like it bothers them. Some of them complain that the same people are in charge. They say the same thugs or whatever in charge. Right. And another thing they say is they're not at all satisfied with certain other things. Like they're not satisfied. It really bothers them that a question of elections, because Jorge Rodriguez, who's the president of the assembly and actually the brother of Delcy Rodriguez, has said that we will do elections after things have been stabilized. And that really bothers them because they want elections whenever, they want elections when they can do a destabilizing activity. So we haven't given up political sovereignty, and there's some really important assets we have on our side. I'd like to enumerate them. One of them is the party. Actually, over the years, Venezuela has developed a powerful party. A second asset, the PSUV, the Socialist Party. A second asset is the army. The army is loyal. It's a popular army. Chavez talked about the civic-military alliance. So that's a huge asset. I'm saying these also because they were assets in China. For example, the People's Liberation Army, the powerful Communist Party. And there's a third thing that many people wouldn't think about, which is control of our finances. That's always been a challenge. And we've always not had sufficient control of finances. And no Latin American country, perhaps except Cuba, has good control of its finances. But because of the blockade and the responses to the blockade, there's been a new level of control over finances in this country, which has eliminated much of the capital flight or money flight that happened previously. And the third thing is just a huge issue, which is the fact that this is a real revolution with a relation between the people and the government, the people, the party, and the government. And that's that nexus that is really the biggest asset. So I think we face this difficult time with some real assets on our side that should make it possible to go through this process of reflection, of figuring out what the next step is to regain our sovereignty over the oil commercialization.
Does there need to be some kind of like pan-American, or not even American, forget that, just global South or just non-Western alliance? I mean, obviously the United States is this behemoth. It's a hegemon. Everyone knows that, not people like us know that the United States is wrong, is in the wrong, but that doesn't cut it, obviously. I mean, I'm not saying anything you don't already know. It's like Castro said, one of his big mistakes was not anticipating the end of the Soviet Union and how that would have a bad effect, a deleterious effect on Cuba. But like, what does need to be done? Because I think sometimes we get lost in our righteous fight to defend the good guys and expose the bad guys. And that's part of it, because if people were more aware of things, they would be less, I think, docile. But we still don't have the arms, right? Probably get removed from YouTube right now, or the money. So what kind of strategic, speaking of strategy again, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to AOC, her comments. But speaking of strategy, like and Lennon, what does need to be done? What is to be done?
Well, I think your point is a good one. I think a lot of us feel impatient, like impatient as far as the response is concerned. We have, we have organisms that unify Latin America, some of them more functional than others. The most ambitious one that was developed by Chavez and Fidel together is ALBA. But that hasn't, ALBA has been eaten away by coup d'etats and regime changes that the U.S. has carried out. And then there's things like UNASUR, which UNASUR was the unified military project, and that has been, unfortunately, more or less killed because of right-wing figures like Milei who've taken power. CELAC still lives, and Petro right now is the acting president. Gustavo Petro is the acting president of CELAC, and they've been able to do things, and ALBA's been able to do things. One thing I think about this moment, because unlike Vijay, I respect Vijay immensely, and I love his work, but unlike Vijay, I do think that we're entering a new fascistoid moment, I think there's a qualitative change. You can always argue, you can always find precedences, but I think if you look at qualitative changes, and particularly, and this is the key thing about fascism, people always forget, fascism is racist, it has bizarre philosophies about vitalism, it has the Führer principle, it has, which they all had, by the way, Marco Rubio, all those people are complete sycophants. They say the Führer principle is like the Führer, the leader, is always right, which is really bizarre with Trump because he contradicts himself from one moment to the next, but he is always right. So there's all these superficial things, but the real thing is what happened during Trump's inauguration, because fascism is not just a bunch of crazies goose-stepping around with brown shirts on. It's monopoly capitalism. It's when the strongest forces of monopoly capitalism come behind the goose-stepping people. And that's what we saw on Trump's inauguration, that most rich people in the world, just like the Krupp family in Nazi Germany, they came behind Hitler. Hitler wasn't just the aesthetics of fascism, but there was also monopoly capitalism behind him. And that's what coalition we saw with Trump's inauguration. And it's continued. Silicon Valley is the motor, These Silicon Valley tech guys are the motors. Many of them are outright racist, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. And so I do believe we're entering a new fascist moment with a new fascist imperialism. So I do think we need a new level of response. Patience is always a problem, because one of the issues with when fascism emerges, fascism typically wins the first battle. They're by nature a militarist, and that's what we've seen on January 3rd and other occasions. And the anti-fascist forces are the people. On the one hand, the majority of people are peace-loving. It takes time to mobilize them. They prefer to peace. There's the most rational thing. And that's what we saw with the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. The people were actually peace-loving, and it took time for the response to develop. And I also think of tragic figures, like figures who despaired as fascism was emerging. There are many examples of people who actually committed suicide as fascism was emerging. I think partly out of despair of not seeing a response, seeing this monster emerge and not seeing the response. So it takes time for the majority to mobilize against fascism. It takes time for the peace-loving people to mobilize against fascism. And partly because their methods are more democratic, or our methods are more democratic. For fascism, it's pretty easy because they believe in dictatorship. The leader says what goes. But the anti-fascist response, the massive response, the response of millions or even billions of people, which it will take to crush MAGA fascism or MAGA imperialism, that will take time to develop. But the truth is, as we saw in the last century, when those masses arrive, they can be a resounding force.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even feel impatient. I just feel like we haven't sufficiently looked into how there has to be a bigger coalition to challenge the West. I don't know what that will look like, but it's just in terms of like the numbers game, like not just a BRICS plus South, Latin America. I don't know what it is, but.
Yeah, well, I do think there are powerful anti-imperialist forces. I do believe there's a unique imperialist system right now, and it's led by the United States. Yeah. Therefore, I include Russia in the anti-imperialist forces, and of course, China and North Korea. All of those are powerful military actors.
Yeah,
so but you're right. We need to incorporate Africa into that. The African countries seeking their sovereignty, seeking their final national liberation, and the Latin American countries have to be brought into that. And that kind of coalition building, many people had hoped that BRICS would be that, but we should always remember that for now, BRICS is mostly a financial, commercial operation.
Right. Yeah. Well, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and look at some. This has been really fascinating, but want to look at a video clip of a New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I guess while she was in Germany, she went to the Technical University of Berlin this past Sunday, and she had the following to say about Nicolás Maduro and what the United States did to Venezuela.
It is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator. And and by the way, Rubio and the Trump administration left Maduro's regime intact. And so even whatever moralizing they have about it, they're just as much a culprit in ignoring the election results as anybody else. But also, we have to understand that when they come for one, they come for us all. It's not a coincidence that when there was such a meek reaction to what happened in Venezuela, they immediately turned around and set their sights on Greenland. And that is why we have to recognize that respecting these standards and strengthening them across the world is what protects all of us individually as well.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there. I'll let you just take the first, hit.
I mean, every time I listen to that clip, a new thing stands out. One of the most, what I see is Alexandra Ocasio is essentially, she's profiling herself. She's listened to a lot of advisors and has cooked up a truly heterogeneous, contradictory discourse. Precisely because the main message, I think you should just look at the big picture. The big picture is that Alejandra Ocasio wants to be a mainstream Democrat. I mean, in other parts of that same talk, she's talking about, she makes an error. She talks about the Pacific Alliance, but she really means the transatlantic alliance. She wants to restore the transatlantic alliance, and she wants to restore a rules-based order for all. Those are code words for democratic imperialism, like the Democrat Party's imperialism. She wants to be an imperialist like the Democratic Party. And then coming back to home, closer to home with the Venezuela thing, it's like, thanks, but no thanks. We shouldn't have done that attack. But no, it's actually completely contradictory. We shouldn't have done that attack, even though he deserved it. But we shouldn't have done the attack. But if we the Democrats had done it, we would have done it better, or something like that. That's the most amazing thing. But the other thing that's truly, I don't know, it's kissing up to the Europeans. Is like saying that the problem with Venezuela is that it's like the preamble to Greenland.
I know. I thought she was going to say Cuba. I thought she was going to say to Cuba, and then I was like, yes, at least she made that point. Yeah. That was insane.
Yeah, and one thing, another thing I could add to the,
and it's also above the equator, right? Venezuela. She says below the equator, happens to be above it. Yeah. So you got it. I mean, whoever your speechwriter is, they needed to do some fact checking. Yeah.
I saw the massive people were clapping with her saying below the equator. I weren't not sure if they were clapping for the non-intervention or if they were clapping, I don't know, because of the huge error.
Right.
But there's another. And one truthful thing she said. She said Nicolas Maduro has delayed elections. And like, why is that? Why were elections
delayed
delayed?
or canceled?
Okay, perhaps she meant canceled.
No, she may. I thought she said canceled, but maybe she said delayed. Let's see. Should we watch that again, or let me see if anyone in the comments can say. Hold on one second, because I'm actually curious now to see if she actually. Brad, can we play that again?
It is not a remark. The nation is below the equator. Anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state. And by the way, Rubio and the Trump administration left Maduro's regime intact. And so even whatever moralizing they have about it, they're just as much a culprit in ignoring the election results as anybody else. But also, we have to understand that when they come for one, they come for us all. It's not a coincidence.
Okay, I think
it is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. She didn't say a truth. I thought she was saying delayed elections. But big thing she leaves out of the picture is the blockade and the sanctions and the terrorist attacks they carried out against us during the last decade. There were these street protests, violent street protests, fascistoid street protests that made elections very difficult. That's what I'm pointing to. Like, she totally ignores the reality. And the reality is those two things. On the one hand, they actually paid people. I'm always the last person to fall, I'm always questioning this when people say there was a paid opposition. But I know, for example, in the 2024 post-elections, they were paid people who went out of the party, because that's the only reason that poor people would do it is they were paid to make this violent protest in the wake of the July 28th election. And then they retreated when they were no longer paid. So there are these two conditions that she's totally ignoring: the blockade and the these aggressions, which include and are not limited to these fascistoid street protests. So that's the reason why the elections had to be delayed several times to make conditions for elections. In fact, Cuba doesn't have the same kind of liberal bourgeois presidential system, partly because they were aware they could not survive imperialism with that kind of, they had to form a different kind of, I believe, a more true kind of democracy in Cuba, because they knew that the kind of presidential elections that happen in our country and many countries in the world are the perfect opportunity for imperialism to put its candidates with its money, with its sabotage, and sometimes with the outright fraud that it carries out. So we face carrying out elections as a real challenge when you're under a blockade and when you're under all kinds of attacks. So sometimes they need to be delayed. They've never been canceled. And the Constitution has always been respected.
Wow. Yeah. So that's, I guess, a not true talking point, the cancellation, which never gets fact checked.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah. So I don't know if you saw also what she said in Taiwan about Taiwan. Someone saying Katie's being selective. I don't know. Why am I looking at this? Brad, I should listen to you. I shouldn't look at the comments. But she said, I wanted to show what she said on Taiwan. Let's see. Okay, here it is. Brad, sorry, I'm going to send you one more thing. Brad, give me a thumbs up if you want it you want me to screen share or do you want me to send it to you? Send it to you. Okay. He went like that. It's called a pointer finger to the side. Okay. I just sent it to you. Okay. Yeah. So she did say cancel. And you were kind of clarifying that the reality on the ground in Venezuela, and you also were talking about the people who are paid to protest, which again you're saying you're skeptical about claims about that, but you actually found out that it was true.
Yeah, there's lots of evidence. I had a Mexican friend who was involved in working in Telesur, and she pretended to be one of them.
Wow.
And or pretended to be at least on their side, and found out things about this command structure and about the payment.
Yeah.
I should point out the elections too. Like people, first of all, people have been questioning the elections. I feel like they should, on the one hand, bow their heads and ask for an apology right now. People on the left who are questioning it, because that's of course the main pretext by which they use to attack us. And then another thing, but the main thing I want to say about the elections is that, of course, there were problems with the elections. There were problems with the machines, and then it went to a question of the electoral authority, the CNE, and it went to the Supreme Court, which is not the only country where that kind of solution is sought. And after a process of review, it was determined from both those organisms, a thorough process of review was determined that Maduro had won. But the main thing I want to ask people who are always questioning the elections is, why do they do it? Like, why do they never respect, including people on the left, who perhaps people who tend more towards liberalism than towards socialism, but they always are questioning our institutions. And that's because, and this is forgive me, but this really bothers me. People on the left liberals, they always say they defend the people of Venezuela or the people of Iran, but it never occurs to them that those people are capable of developing government, are capable of developing institutions, and those institutions are a key part of their sovereignty. So I'm always, when people on the left are saying, oh, I'm with the people, I always say, well, what if the people have institutions? What if people have developed constitutions? What if people have developed their own political system? You should respect that too. And that's what a lot of people on the left fail to see. They fail to respect our national sovereignty, which is expressed through those institutions.
Right. Yeah. What if people just happen to elect people who you don't like?
Yeah, exactly.
So here's what AOC said in Munich about when asked about what the United States response would be if basically if the U.S. would commit to troops would commit to boots on the ground if China moved on Taiwan.
And should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very longstanding policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Okay, so she's basically saying she hopes it never comes to this, right? To China having this intervention or whatever you want to call it, moving on Taiwan.
Yeah, I just, like, you can see her, those 20 seconds are actually painful for me to listen to her backpedaling and saying, and maybe, and all those things. And I think it's basically what's going on in her head is the sensible thing that she wants to say that they're going to be, she's decided that they can be better imperialists than they can at least be a different kind of imperialist, a more civilized kind of imperialist, a more, frankly, closer to the Democratic Party's line on imperialism, which probably is more, in the current moment, it's always difficult to know where things are going, is probably more directly anti-China. But actually I believe that Trump and his gangsters are also completely anti-China too. They just have shifted tactics somewhat. In fact, a lot of what they're doing against Venezuela, when people think that the attack on Venezuela was simply a decision, some people contend that it was simply a decision of the oil sector in the United States, and that can't really be the case because it's not a good moment for oil prices. The investors that Trump wants are quite reluctant. So if it involves oil, it's relatively rather more strategic decision. But a lot of what they're interested in is cutting the supply to China. Admittedly, Venezuelan oil was about 4% of China's source of oil, but they strategically want to keep China and Russia out of. They want to fight a war against China and Russia, especially against China in this territory, in our hemisphere, at least first. So they haven't at all abandoned the idea of attacking China. But you can see Alejandra Ocasio looking to position herself to be a Democratic Party leader, which means being a leader of the Democratic Party's kind of imperialism. And that's what she said regarding the Venezuelans. That seems to be what she's turning around in her head with Taiwan.
Yeah. Well, it's and she's not pleasing anyone. That's the other thing. It just comes off, as the left doesn't like it, the right doesn't like it, and she just looks kind of confused or word salady. I mean, again, I want to be clear that like sometimes she gets thrown into the same way. She's obviously, what she's saying is not what Trump is saying and not what Rubio is saying, but it's problematic. It's in a very different way.
Yeah, it would be hard to match Rubio's level of, I believe, fascism. I was totally astounded by. We've seen fascism brewing in all kinds of speakers, but that was a page what was it, like 15-minute disc talk?
Yeah.
Maybe it was longer. Yeah. Actually, it was longer. But to me, it was just right out of Heidegger's taking the Rector discourse, in which he talks about now the Volk, the people will step forward, the white people will step forward and make a decision to overcome our feebleness, the former feebleness. And another thing that's really striking to me is there wasn't a single mention of indigenous people in the story of the world. And there was not a single mention of people of color. Black people did not appear in it at all. Right. And women. The only women he mentioned were some relatives of his lost in the annals of, he mentioned two probably great-great-great-grandmothers of Marco Rubio. Right. But it's curious that he had to cut out women entirely when, given his notion of the great empires, he could have included Isabel of Castilla or something.
Right,
too, but he didn't. So it's a pretty astounding discourse. And also astounding, speaking about, the fascist meters, that people didn't throw them out.
Of course not. Yeah, no. I mean, it's so interesting because I think that the way that the United States sees race, it changed a little bit because even the Spanish, like Spaniards, used to be seen as not totally white. But it is interesting because if you are from Cuba or Venezuela, or he's not from either of those places, but if your family is, you're like considered Latino, not necessarily white. But obviously these are descendants of, in many cases, quite directly, of Spaniards, right? Spaniards who went to the New World to conquer, which is, but they don't come along. It's just an interesting way that white privilege works and doesn't work, and how someone like Rubio, I mean, I think he's so obviously, he's like such an imperialist and such a white supremacist that, but I wonder if he looks in the mirror and feels like he can't be as much of a white supremacist as he wants to be just because of his coloring.
Yeah, I think he did I think he's pretty much dropped all the mask and went for it this time.
Yeah.
That's why I think we're entering this new moment in which I think this is a qualitative change.
Yeah.
And it's partly because you have people speaking like that, and you also have these powerful economic actors behind them and willing to throw in their lot with them.
Right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. Anything else you want to add before we wrap for tonight? And definitely come back on because it's been fascinating.
I'll be happy to. Maybe one thing I want to make a plug for is the famous communal movement in Venezuela.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, that's part of the revolution. It's not the whole revolution. It's probably the most advanced part of the revolution. I think the communal movement is one of the actors who can, as it did in the last decade, the communal movement was one of the actors that really held the highest ideals of the revolution during a difficult time. I'm not criticizing Nicolas Maduro, but he had to make some difficult decisions about how to overcome the blockade. Some of that were like the new economic program, in which there was more opening to capitalism, more opening to free trade. And then the communal movement was like the redoubt, the reserve, the moral reserve of the revolution. And the wise communards, there were some communards that kind of went ultra left and kind of made some ultra left errors, but that wasn't the norm. The majority of the communal movement did a patient work of preserving the values of the revolution and showing by example that they could lead different processes. For example, and we've seen that in these days. So I want to point out how some of the communes, the El Panal commune, they spontaneously have done activities to support the revolution, to support the government, to insist on the return of Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores. So the communal movement can be one of these actors that goes forward and patiently through example, not through a lot of chest beating or certainly not through criticism. I really hate the critical left because the most important thing the left can do is show by example that it can contribute economically, that it can contribute to our participative process, and that it can lead certain crucial campaigns during this difficult period. But the communal movement has really shown itself to be up on that level. We have a commune artist as minister, an important minister in the government. And I'd say in these past weeks, the commune arts have really come forward. And they're also among the factors that are processing this new situation of trying to figure out how we can go forward in the future, recover this loss of economic sovereignty. It's not the whole economy, but it's an important part of it. And they're also working on the international angle because in this new situation, it's somewhat harder for the government to maintain overtly some of the most revolutionary contexts. But this can be done on a people-to-people, South-South basis. And I've seen that some of the communists are already working that angle.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for all your analysis and information that you've provided.
Thank you, Katie. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Yeah. And we'll have you back on soon. Okay. Good night. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This has been a great show. Wonderful guests, wonderful discussions. Let's see. Brad, is anything going to be Patreon? What do you think? I mean, we could do we could tease a little hot take from Vijay Prashad. If a hot take from Vijay Prashad, or not even a hot take, a sympathetic take, a compassionate take, a nuanced take from Vijay Prashad on Noam Chomsky is not on this, then you'll know where to find it. It will be at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And do not forget to tune in to subscribe. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be doing a stream on Friday. It may be at 11 a.m. Not sure yet. And next week, we're going to have such a cool show. I'll just tell you, it'll be about the religious freedom hearing. Carrie Prejean is going to be here talking to her and Yaakov Shapiro. Brad, you want to say anything? I just have missed you, so I'm throwing you into the chat, to whatever it is. Yeah.
No, that sounds very interesting. And this was a great show.
It was,
and
right?
You were such a trooper.
Oh, thank you. Katie, thank you for talking about La Concordia in your last live. I've been begging influencers to do so for months. And Great Scout Epsilon, thank you for that. Yeah, sorry I cut you off.
I was just like, well, if this is the sort of program when you're not feeling well, geez.
Wow. Well, you say that like you don't usually see my program. Oh, can we show people the TikTok I made? Because the reason I want to show that is because I'm going to do it on Upscroll also. But since we talked about TikTok last week, hold on. Oh my gosh. I was like, I need to get back into TikTok. So here's a little thing I did. It's not that great. It's not the sound mixed. And I'm going to be on Upscroll too.
We've had a great debate over the years about this, and I'm happy to hear you say that.
Oh, I don't know what the debate is.
Oh, getting into TikTok and all this.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Let's take a look. And don't worry, we're going to be on Upscroll too. I just did it on TikTok because I have people who helped me do that. Okay. So the other day, Attorney General Pam Bondi was questioned over the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files. One of the people who questioned Bondi was Becca Balint, a Democrat of Vermont, who urged Bondi to speak to Epstein's victims.
Do the right thing, Attorney General. Meet with the survivors. They have been asking for a year. Meet with the survivors. Do the right thing.
Bondi thought that a good way to respond to this would be by suggesting that Becca Balint is an anti-Semite because she refused to vote for a resolution which claimed that the phrase "from the river to the sea" is anti-Semitic.
I want the record to reflect that, with this anti-Semitic culture right now, she voted against a resolution condemning.
I just want to be clear.
Becca Balint found this particular line of criticism a bit frustrating, and I will let her explain why.
With this anti-Semitic culture right now, she voted against a resolution condemning.
Is Jewish. I just want to be clear. Do you want to go there, Attorney General? Or do you want to go there? Are you serious? Talking about anti-Semitism to a woman who lost her grandfather in the Holocaust.
You had a non-Jewish woman accuse a Jewish woman whose grandfather died in the Holocaust of being anti-Semitic. Now, I want to be clear as an anti-Zionist Jew, very clear that what Bondi is doing is that she is trying to suggest that the expression from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic. And Becca Balint, who voted against that resolution because it's obviously not, Bondi has the chutzpah to accuse her of being an anti-Semite, because Bondi is the one who's weaponizing anti-Semitism and the Holocaust in order to silence critics of Israel as anti-Semitic. There's nothing that new about this. We know that for people like Bondi, they claim to care about Jews, they claim to care about anti-Semitism, they claim to care about Jewish feelings and Jewish safety, but they really don't. In fact, what they want is they want to support Israel for various strategic reasons, and if they're evangelicals, they probably want us Jews to go back, quote unquote, back to Israel, where all of us, except for I think 400, will burn in eternal damnation, and then some of us get this loophole where we get to accept Lord Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, if we're lucky. But what I found really rich about this exchange is that Pam Bondi doesn't even pretend to give a crap about Becca Balint's feelings after she learns that she's Jewish and lost her grandfather in the Holocaust. In fact, watch what she does as Becca Balint, who's visibly upset, leaves Congress, leaves the hall. Watch what she does. Check out this mean girl shit. Look at the duck face she does, and then the laugh and the hair flip.
Member knows that can I get like 30 seconds back, you know? Yeah,
Anyway, I just couldn't even take it. I couldn't believe it. It was so, like, again, these people are so bad. They pretend that they care at all about Jewish safety, Jewish feelings. And it's not like it's okay if they do that in order to kill Palestinians. It's not like you get to just invoke that. But, and of course, if Bondi were like defending Palestinians and Balint were attacking them and used her grandfather's Jewish identity and death in the Holocaust as a shield, that would be problematic. But like, don't you have to pretend, Pam Bondi, that you think it's sad that this woman lost her fucking grandfather in the Holocaust? Like, isn't the whole thing that you care about Jews? No, not at all. You just care about Zionism.
Right, because we're living in a post-truth, they just invent their own truth. But in this instance, this was some like Jerry Springer shit.
I know,
and it seemed like anytime anyone asked her anything, she just blathered on about whatever just to get out of actually answering very direct questions.
Yeah.
And I mean, in that case, I don't know if it was like, if she was crafty enough to pick that reply to her to try and instigate the reaction to basically then,
I think
totally
she's too dumb. I don't think she even knew.
Regarding the thing too, you were talking about a minute ago about, they believe all Jews would go here,
right,
and then, everyone would burn. I would counter, there's a debate that we're already burning in eternal hell.
Oh,
Katie,
good.
With
Good call.
With absolute monsters
yeah.
like this. Like when what was it? Was it Pramila Jayapal had these women literally standing right behind her and was just saying, will you simply turn around and acknowledge? And this, I'm really trying hard not to swear and not say some, just whatever the worst things you could say to a person, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is about her, like what they have on her, or if she just literally has no soul, like why. I'm at a loss. Like, I get why Trump would, be doing all of that, but her going to bat like this over people that will throw her to the wolves at the first opportunity, like, is she going to be the CEO of some company later, or is she just evil? I don't know.
She's
it's crazy.
Yeah. She loves Miriam Adelson, and Miriam Adelson loves her. Anyway, I guess the point
really?
is that, like, oh yeah. The thing is, I'm naive because I always think that like Zionist Jews who care about anti-Semitism will be offended, but they already know that these people aren't really their allies. That's the thing. They already know that they're just like, they hate Palestinians, or they're willing to kill Palestinians, not because they care about Jews. So they're probably like, whatever, let her laugh and flip her hair at Becca Balint, who's a bad Jew. They would consider a bad Jew because she wouldn't sign that ridiculous resolution saying that From the River to the Sea is anti-Semitic. So they're probably like, she deserves it. She deserves it. And
even,
who cares?
like, even the feeling that I'm getting right now as we're talking about it, I just realized in myself, like, the anger and the hate and essentially all negative things that I am feeling right now. Like, what does that do to the country at large? Like, when this is what the state of affairs is, like, you see Congress and it's like a old school Jerry Springer type stuff, and it's all of it is just
it's
hate
either Jerry
and
Springer or Jerry Atrick. Hey. Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for coming on, Brad. I got to sleep because, as people can tell, I'm a little sick. Pam Bondi's Italian, of Italian heritage, by the way. And anyway, so we will see you Friday. And I'll be, if needed, I was here alone last Friday because I didn't tell Brad with enough time. And that's why I didn't have like the good intro or outro. That's why I had to switch my mic like midstream, but it's okay. People were happy. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll make it better this week.
Yeah. And go to that for that little nugget. I think it's good to have a little Chomsky nugget on Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show.
I did everything right and they indicted me. And I don't know what the I'm doing. Antifa!